Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, streaming January 25th, only on Netflix.
Listen to the 48 Hours podcast for shocking murder cases and compelling real-life dramas from one of television's most watched true crime shows. Go behind the scenes of each episode with award-winning CBS News correspondents and producers in Postmortem, a weekly deep dive. Listen to 48 Hours wherever you get your podcasts.
A note to listeners, the following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
We have primary victims, which are the people who are actually involved. We have secondary victims, which would be the family members, friends, law enforcement that are involved. And then society itself is a tertiary victim. Before anything else can happen, there needs to be resolution. Whatever it is that happened, I think people can, over time, sort of tell themselves that whatever happened, happened. But until they know, believing is one thing. Knowing is something very different. And until the community in its entirety knows what happened to these two, there's never really going to be an opportunity for post-traumatic growth.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman.
What happened to Molly and Colt is a tragedy, and the ripple effects of this case are equally as tragic. There are so many people who have suffered because of this. Their immediate families, their extended families, their friends, all of these people have been living with this nightmare since July 8th, 2013. So many people have told us that the hardest part of this case is the not knowing.
The other victims of this crime are all of the people who have been supporting the families, the residents of that community, and even law enforcement. For almost 10 years, they, like the family, have had to live with this tragic unsolved crime that has shadowed Love County and its neighboring towns.
When the murders of Molly and Colt are finally solved, and the persons or person who committed this crime are brought to justice, the healing from this trauma will need to begin for everyone involved. But what will that look like?
To try to answer that question and provide some perspective on how people get through these traumatic events that happen in their lives, we reached out to a forensic psychologist who is certified with the American Red Cross as a certified clinical traumatologist.
As a licensed psychologist, Dr. John Delatorre works in communities providing psychological first aid as a disaster mental health volunteer. We thought with his experience in dealing with human traumatic events that it was a logical place to start, and we're happy to have him on today.
Okay, we have John Delatorre on the phone with us right now. John is a forensic psychologist, and he does a lot of true crime work. He works in the legal community. John, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you do, about your career and your expertise?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a forensic psychologist. What that basically means is that I apply psychological concepts to the legal system. So I'm often asked to perform evaluations on individuals who may have committed crimes, competency to stand trial, insanity, waive Miranda rights, anything that involves criminal law. And the issue of someone's mental health, I'm usually asked to participate in. As for other kinds of work that I do, I am often asked to be a guest speaker on live trial coverage for both Court TV and the Law and Crime Trial Network. And then another aspect of what I do is certainly giving back to the community. And one way in which I do that is I'm a member of a nonprofit organization called Project Absentis, which is made up of prior FBI, other law enforcement officers who search for missing persons.
That's awesome. That's a lot of things that you're doing in the true crime world,
Yeah.
which is really amazing. So Rob told me that he kind of filled you in a little bit about the Molly and Colt case. So I was really curious to see what your thoughts were, because we haven't really spoken to a forensic psychologist about this. And I think that there's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of layers to the psychology behind this case and how it's affected all these people and this community. And I would really love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, honestly, it's like peeling an onion. Right. And it's even more difficult because the onion that you're trying to peel, you're doing it in a completely blacked out room. right? Because there's so many different layers that's happening, and there's so many sort of ways in which things have been covered up that you never really quite get the sense that you've been told the whole truth about something. It always seems to maybe take you in a direction that you hadn't anticipated going, which can make it difficult for individuals to really feel confident that what's happening needs to be happening. It can make community members, it can make people feel like they can't trust the system. Like under certain circumstances, people are going to get away with things that they shouldn't have, or that things that have happened in their community aren't going to be investigated because of X, Y, or Z. It can place a lot of distrust and a lot of confusion into authority figures when you're not quite sure that everything that you want to happen is happening. But that being said, family members, friends, like all these individuals that are intimately involved with the two victims of whatever it was that has happened, clearly are going to want things to move very quickly, clearly are going to want things settled. They want justice. And it's a hard road to navigate, making sure that everybody feels justice has been served, because not everybody can feel that way at all times.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what this case is all about. And I know you've kind of ramped up on it by catching up on the podcast and any other kind of additional research you've done. This is a case that's been going on for almost 10 years. And it's a small rural community. It's a nice place. In that small community, there's a few bad actors, and they have a methamphetamine problem down there, obviously. It's kind of, what is your experience? I mean, because you live in the Texas area. I mean, you're familiar with these rural communities and not too far away from where all this happened. What's your experience in communities like this that have kind of has a stranglehold, like a crime like this has a stranglehold on the community, and what does it do to the community?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about, how a community adjusts to a crime like this, because what we have to remember is that we make up all of our communities, right? And we're each members of multiple communities all at the same time. And so it makes our society, it makes the communities that we live in just as a living being as you and I are. And it can have emotional states, and things like this can bring down a community. And often people who feel down, they look to other outside external sources in order to cope with feeling down. Some people use positive things to help them get motivated, like eating right and exercising. And some people, they fall victim into drugs and alcohol and other kinds of issues that, are much more negative. And so societies, communities in and of themselves can be significantly impacted by crimes that have committed that maybe have nothing to do with every single member of the community, but it's still a tertiary victim, right? So if we have primary victims, which are the people who actually involved, we have secondary victims, which would be the family members, friends, law enforcement that are involved. And then society itself is a tertiary victim, a larger ripple in the water that can really impact and bring down a community because it's not settled. They don't believe that the law enforcement have the ability to solve the case, which can put pressure on both the law enforcement and to its citizens to try to figure out what's happened, when neither one by themselves really have what's necessary. So then you hope that the state comes in and brings in their resources, but who's to say that they're going to devote whatever it is that they need to do to some small town when they have other big cities that they need to be devoting other resources to? So it can then isolate you. It can cut you off from the rest of the larger community because you feel like your problems aren't taken seriously.
I agree. And I think you just
absolutely have just described this whole area and what's happened to them and it's interesting because this case cracked open all of the corruption that was happening in that area that people were aware of, but nobody was talking about. So it is interesting that it was almost like the tipping point for this area, and the methamphetamine addictions have increased over the past 10 years. But this case was really the spark that opened up everything about what was really going on here.
We just get the feedback on, we have like a discussion board on our Facebook page, as well as there's one for Operation Find Molly Miller too. And you can just see the community struggling with the fact that this was a brutal crime that was committed in their neighborhood, in their area, and they feel like a lot of the people are afraid to come forward because of reprisals, and they don't trust police. I mean, we were just on a call this morning where someone else is investigating the case. They said they don't trust police. So that's one of the main problems of getting information from people.
Yeah, trust is a huge thing, and it works multiple ways. Number one, if you already know that the people who are supposed to protect you are the same people who are allowing bad things to happen, and in some cases complicit in the bad things that are happening, there's already going to be a wall built up between you and that authority figure. So you are never really going to allow yourself to be fully authentic, to tell the entire truth about what you know about something to them. But also, it goes back the other way, that these individuals who are corrupt, right, who use their power, must distrust the people that they are lording over, the people that they are attempting to overpower. Because if they trusted them, then they wouldn't feel compelled to lord over them or overpower them. It would be a much more safe community because there wouldn't be this necessity to exceed your authority and to use power. So there's already a level of mistrust going either direction. And so in those cases, you need someone from the outside, someone who's not a member of the community to step up and say, no, this is not what I'm used to. This is very different. This is very wrong. Someone from the outside needs to come in and say, look, we've got to make changes here.
Yeah, how does that happen? How does a change like that happen? That's a big shift. It's like this community in this case is like a gigantic ship that's just kind of cruising into the harbor, and you can't just pull the brakes on this thing and it'll stop on a dime. There is going to be a residual drift into something and crash into it. So how does a community recover from something like this? You know, hopefully this case is going to be solved soon, and there's got to be a huge come to Jesus post-mortem about how all of this came about and how we got to this point after the 9.5 years. What do you think they're going to have to do to recover from this, kind of just psychologically, to kind of get back on track to where people trust the law enforcement, people won't be afraid to come out and speak out if they've seen something or have heard something? What's the mechanism that can help move this forward?
Sure. If we're going to extend your cruise ship metaphor just a little bit more, what I would say is that you need to bring in the entire ship into dry dock and start completely over, right? You need to scrape all the barnacles off the bottom. You need to replace the captain. You need to replace the crew, right? That you need to come in. There needs to be a total overhaul shift. Now, that being said, we have to put it into context with what a community can actually do. Real power is held within the citizens of a community. We believe that we give that power to someone else, right, by elected officials or something like that. We believe that we give it up, but the truth is we always had it. We just lease it out. The community needs to feel confident in and of itself that it can handle its problems on its own. The most important thing is the community needs to be connected to the individuals, and the individuals need to feel connected to the community. So you can start with going to different parks and cleaning it up just as a group. You can start with making sure that the community, your leaders are doing everything they can to bring in resources for rehabilitation, for drug use and stuff like that. Asking individuals therapists, psychologists, counselors who have experience in dealing both with trauma, but also addiction specialists, to have access to those professionals, to not stigmatize the things that people have had to do in order to survive. Remember, they weren't born wanting to do drugs. They weren't born wanting to commit crimes. Things happened in their lives where they felt that that was the only choice that they could make. Stigmatizing these individuals will continue the negative feedback loop that this community is already in. You have to change the narrative. And yes, sometimes that means one person from the outside has to come in and make those changes. But usually the community has to decide in itself that it wants to do that. It needs a persuasive and charismatic leader that believes in fostering healing, right? Because it's had too many charismatic leaders who've just used their charisma and power to overpower individuals. Anybody can be that leader if they're trying to do good for the community. And if the people believe in that person, belief, faith, whatever it is that you want to call it, whether it's a spiritual or religious belief that the community in and of itself can heal itself, will foster the long-term goal. Because this is going to be a long-term thing. It's never going to be something that can just happen on the snap. This is going to take a very long time to heal all of these wounds.
Yeah, we agree. I mean, it's deep, and people are really afraid of the perpetrators that live in that area, and they live in fear, and they're just bullies. So it's a really unfortunate situation for the people that do live there, because this case not only shined a light on the law enforcement's corruption, but it empowered these bullies to continue over the years to terrorize this community with no repercussions for it.
Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting about, just in without talking about like a larger community, I mean, it's a pretty decent sized community, but a lot of these people are related to each other distantly and closely. They're cousins. I mean, the victim, Molly Miller, is a distant relative to Nip, who caused the high-speed pursuit. So it's very incestuous in that way. So can you talk a little bit about like communities like this that are so close-knit like this, and how much more difficult it probably is to get the truth to come out, because it opens up Pandora's box with everybody else's secrets.
Sure. Yeah. You think about, as a psychologist, I start thinking about family systems theory, about how these negative feedback loops, how enmeshment happens, how all of these different things that happen within a biological relationship. It's a lot, if we think about it, it's a lot easier to be mad at family members. It's a lot easier to be extreme with your aggression, with your anger, with your frustration. It's a lot easier because in the back of your mind, you know that they're not going to go anywhere. It's this weird dichotomy of that we feel more comfortable, or we believe ourselves to be more comfortable, expressing extremes amount of negative emotions towards family members that we wouldn't feel comfortable doing or believe ourselves comfortable doing to total and complete strangers. So it makes it much more difficult then to rebuild the relationships, right? So that's where you got to start thinking about, well, how can we change the narrative in these kinds of situations? Having community cookouts, right? Having, celebration days for some kind of holiday or something where people can reconnect under positive circumstances. It's going to be very difficult for some family members to look at other family members who have committed crimes against them and say, I'm going to embrace you as the family that we are. It's going to be extremely difficult. That's when every individual probably needs their own therapy to deal with the trauma that they know has happened as a direct result from the hands of a family member. It's never going to be an easy thing to just embrace someone who's harmed you. It's going to be an even more difficult thing to embrace someone that has harmed you when you share the same blood. So working through all of these kinds of things, you have to change this idea that we can never be fixed again. We can never be whole again. Absolutes cannot happen in a place that's trying to foster a positive change. Embracing the idea that, yes, sometimes things are going to go wrong. Sometimes things are going to go bad, but we're going to deal with this together. And that's not an easy thing to do. I'm not saying that it's easy for me to say, but it's certainly not an easy thing to do for the individuals that are living there. But the first thing that I think needs to happen is resolution with Molly Miller and Colt Haynes. Before anything else can happen, there needs to be resolution. Whatever it is that happened, I think people can, over time, sort of tell themselves that whatever happened. But until they know, believing is one thing. Knowing is something very different. And until the community in its entirety knows what happened to these two, there's never really going to be an opportunity for post-traumatic growth.
Yeah, that's what we feel too. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have to have some answers in order to move on and to make sense of all the craziness that they've been hearing about, and all the rumors and all about what was done to them. And the problem is that a lot of the people in that community know what happened to her, and a lot of them are afraid to speak out. There have been numerous times where we've been called with tips, and then we follow up on the tips, and then they clam up, and they said we can't talk because, i.e., they don't want to get involved, or they feel like they're in danger. Can you talk a little bit about what goes on psychologically for people who know something went wrong? They know they were not witness to a crime, or they know somebody who was part of a crime and they want to talk, but their self-preservation is preventing them from talking. What's going on in the mind there?
Yeah, and I think you really hit, Rob, right there, this idea of self-preservation, because we might have multiple things happening at the same time. That yes, there is corrupt law enforcement individuals. Yes, there might be drug dealers and stuff like that that want to keep their business kind of more secretive, right? And all these things may be at play. But you really got to ask yourself, right, as on the outside, our audience listening right now, you really got to ask yourself, are they in danger? Or do they believe themselves to be in danger because of the way in which they've had to live their lives? Because I would anticipate that if all of them decided that they were just going to put one big post, put all of their names, one big post, all of them together, one big post on your Facebook, or maybe they all contact you on a community call all together. There's safety and strength in numbers. Right? You feel more confident. This is why we live in communities. This is why we have people that are not our family, but we have friends, because we need that large group connection in order to feel safe, in order to feel secure. And certainly some individuals probably really are in danger. They really do have this information, but because they are being monitored by police, or because they may be involved with the crime itself, or maybe because they're involved with the dealers or, the other actors that are at play, that they really cannot talk, but they want to talk. Because it's, as you said, it's self-preservation. But if you think about it, if we really think about it, if you're the person that has this information and you want to give it, it's a very difficult thing to live with by only giving it some of the time and not all of the time. The guilt that you're going to be holding inside of you by not telling the full information that you have is going to be much worse psychologically. It's going to prey on you much worse than the belief that someone else is going to harm you in some way. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But imagine if you're the person with the information, you reveal that information and its tentacles, its branches, bring down all of the people that you were afraid of. Then probably you were just living in fear because you had been living in fear. Not so much that you actually were in danger.
You caught my follow-up question, because what I was going to ask you is, what does it do to the human psyche when they have to keep a secret as large as that? Information about a double homicide in what was done, what was presumed to be done, what we believe was done to both Molly and Colt. What does that do to people? And I also want to ask you another question, because we get a lot of tips from women. We don't get a whole lot of tips. We get a few tips from men. So what is the difference between men and women as far as harboring truths and harboring secrets? And why are we getting more from women than we are getting from men?
Why are you getting more secrets from women and why you're getting more secrets and not getting as many secrets from men probably goes to a much larger societal issue. What I'm going to say is this: communities like this tend to be very masculine in their beliefs. It's probably very rare for a female to make it to the upper echelons of power in communities like this. I'm not going to say that they are inherently misogynistic, because I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that there is a very old, I'm going to say conservative. I don't mean politically conservative. I just mean that there's an old conservative way in which the power dynamics are utilized in communities like this. So it's not surprising then that women are coming forward the more, because they see, right? Women are humans. Women see what is going on, but it's the men in power that don't believe that a woman can bring them down. So men will openly talk about whatever it is that they're going through. Maybe they shun the woman away, maybe they don't, but they don't believe that the woman that's there is in any way powerful enough to bring them down. The men, however, the men who are not in the upper echelons of power, they live in fear of the men in the upper echelons of power, or they live in a sort of nexus in which they want to be in the upper echelons, but have to do so, but can only get there if those at the top will them into it. So then they can't do anything that would impact that role. So I'm not surprised that you get more information from women, because women see what's going on and they see what's happening. Men just don't believe that a woman will do anything against them. And I think that has a lot to do with the more rural kind of community that this location is in. And it's not to say that every rural area is like this. It's not to say that what they believe and how they believe is bad. It's just how it is. And so that being said, there are two very different emotional occurrences that would be happening in someone who has this knowledge. It's shame and it's guilt. Guilt is a good feeling. And I say it's good, even though it's being described as a negative feeling. It's a good feeling to have because it means that you have a conscience. It means that you're not necessarily going to break the law or do something like that, because you know that that would be the wrong thing to do. Shame, on the other hand, is a very debilitating, negative emotional experience. It can wither away your own self-esteem. Those in power want you to feel shame because it keeps you weak. It keeps you in a position where you can be lorded over, where you can be influenced. Guilt, if you feel guilt, then you might be able to do something about that, because it's an external feeling that says, look, this is wrong. What I'm feeling is wrong. What I've done is wrong. I need to change that. Shame, however, it's a very internalized feeling, and it makes it so that it's very difficult for you to do something. Either one is really going to have negative consequences to the person experiencing the emotions. But the guilt, it's what gets you go. It's the reason why you're getting phone calls at all, because people are feeling guilty, which is a good sign, because it means then that they can do something about it. They're not feeling shame, right? Because shame would have meant that you're not getting any calls because people don't believe that they can do anything about it. They've moved on from the shame of the community into the guilt. They recognize that they can do something. They just don't know how. They just don't know what's going to be the negative consequence for it. And the listeners really need to understand that there's potentially a negative consequence, but there's a negative consequence for every decision that we make. What's the best for our society? What would be the best thing for Molly Miller and Colt Haynes, who no one is speaking for, right? You feel guilty because you know no one is speaking for them. Their truth has not been resolved yet. Use that emotional experience to make the change that is necessary. What you're feeling is okay, right? The guilt. To the listeners who have this information, it's okay. Reveal it. Something negative may happen, but something positive will for sure happen, because resolution will occur. The family members and friends of Molly Miller and Colt Haynes will finally get to rest at ease that they had the knowledge now of what happened to the both of them.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You articulated exactly what we've kind of been preaching, more on a pedestrian level throughout this thing for people to come out. But I think understanding how the human mind and the emotions work, which you illustrated eloquently, really kind of brings home to us why people really need to come out. They need to free themselves of this information. They need to, because otherwise they're never going to, you're going to be living with that, and it's going to be festering. It's going to turn to shame. And we all know that there are psychological problems that are both connected to the body as well that can attribute to breakdown of a person completely.
Physically, too.
Yeah,
I mean, your physical health is affected by your emotions. So if you're harboring this secret and it festers into shame and you're feeling that all the time, it's going to affect your well-being overall, physically and mentally.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rob, once again, you say the right word, which is freedom, right? And Cindy, you're talking about how the physical health of someone, right? So we're not surprised then that methamphetamine, alcohol use, marijuana, cocaine, heroin use runs rampant. And what's going to be the consequences of that, right? It's going to be heart disease. It's going to be cancer. It's going to be all these other things that are going on physically. And if you're not physically feeling well, then your mental health is going to go. And if your mental health wasn't already strong to begin with, then you're more likely. I wouldn't be surprised to hear that there's a high level of mortality in that area, not just because of the drug use, but simply because of all of these ancillary effects that holding on to a secret like this not only has on the individual, but of the community itself. I wouldn't be surprised if there would be areas areas of the community that fall into disrepair, right? Because people just don't have the energy to do it anymore. If they could feel the freedom of revealing the truth, whatever it is that they know, if they could feel that freedom. And it's a very complicated thing, because what we understand about freedom is that it means you understand that there's no safety net, right? When you turn an adult, you realize there's no safety net anymore. When you're a child, you can make decisions and you believe that there's a safety net of your parents, caregivers, whoever that is. But once you turn in as an adult and you recognize that you're going to have to pay the consequences, the level of freedom that you're willing to give yourself is much smaller. And in essence, you begin to tell yourself, this world is a dangerous place. People are out to get me. It absolutely adds to this idea of paranoia that you will be harmed if you reveal something, when in actuality, you're probably not going to be as harmed as you think that you will be. So allowing yourself to feel the freedom will go a long way to then bringing back up the health, the overall physical health, and then the mental health of each individual of the community.
Yeah, no, we agree. I want to shift gears a little bit here. Paula Felder, Molly's cousin, who has spearheaded this entire quest to find out what happened to both her cousin Molly and Colt. We're trying to wrap our head around how she's been able to continue on in the way she has every day for 9.5 years in this quest to find out what happened to these two people. And to me, it looks like, because we've known her since 2018 now, and we've been looking into this case, to me, she is an anatomy of what an advocate for something like this needs to be. In order for, because in the beginning, obviously, you're familiar with the whole problem with the mishandling of the case from the get-go and the corrupt sheriff who, as a result of prodding around in this case, exposed himself to the point where he had to step down after being accused of a bunch of felonies. But what does it say about someone's psychological makeup, like Paula's, to be able to help her and give her strength every day? And what can we learn about that? Because I think we've run into a lot of these victims' families. We've been doing this a long time, and the other person that comes to mind is the Kessie family out of Orlando, who had a very similar experience, and they had to take the law and the investigation into their hands just like Paula did. So what's the psychological makeup of that type of person who will refuse to just be passive and not wait for answers, but to go find answers? And how can we teach other people, other victims' families, to be those kind of advocates for their family members in these horrific crimes, where we know that a lot of times the law is, their hands are tied. There's just so many things they have to do in order to make things happen, in order for the investigation. And if they don't get the right answers, or if the right witness, or in this case, everybody they interview who's a druggie, the entire community in that area and those people have done drugs or are doing drugs, and they're not considered reliable witnesses. So what does it say about Paula's personality, and what is it that keeps her going, to keep going like this and not break down?
I mean, breaking down is a unique thing, and that it's certainly possible that she never breaks down. And it's also certainly possible that once there's resolution and once the evidence is out there, that the first thing that she's going to do is break down. But the real thing, the real power and strength that she has, and the real thing that I think everybody can learn from her, is this idea of resiliency. Generally speaking, this is not related to the crime, but just generally speaking, if you enter into a conversation with someone and you leave the conversation feeling more confused than you did before entering into it, it's probably because someone lied to you. And so we think about that, and we think about, well, if something were to happen to my family members, what could I do? And the truth is, we don't know what any of us are capable of doing until we're put into a situation where we have to make a decision. Some of us will decide that we're just going to be more passive, and some of us are going to decide that we're going to be more active. It really doesn't matter. I mean, in some ways it is an influence, but it really doesn't matter what outside external influences like law enforcement or anything. It doesn't really matter what they're doing. I imagine that Paula would have felt compelled to be involved the way that she has been, even if the police were doing their job from the beginning, because she's been doing it for so long. It takes a lot of energy to deal with something like this day in and day out. Ask any detective who's done the same amount of time investigating crimes, just how mentally taxing it is to go into work every day, investigating a crime, trying to resolve it, right? To try to find the truth of what happened. Resiliency is the key here. You have to believe that the decision that you made is in the best interest of not only you, but of the person that you're doing it for. What gives you energy is the knowledge that the person is going to appreciate in some way what you have done for them. The resiliency to take the negative things that happen. And there's clearly been setbacks for her. All the negative setbacks doesn't bring her down totally and completely. It may knock her down, but she gets back up. She always gets back up. And that's the same thing for the community. The community has been knocked down with, a sheriff who's been abusing his power, deputies who have been abusing their power, drugs that have entered into the community, drug dealers who are giving drugs to whoever that they're giving drugs to, right, to the younger people and stuff like that. Crimes being committed. It can knock a community down if it does not believe that it can be resilient to stand back up after every single punch that it gets. It's going to stay down. So everyone can learn. Once again, to those individuals who have information, to those individuals who don't believe brighter days are ahead, you can look at Paula, at what she's doing, and say to yourself, she's resolved. She has resiliency. It's not that she believes that, she's the almighty or she has every skill that is necessary to solve this crime. It's that she recognizes that she doesn't, and that she's doing the best that she can, that she's going to continue to move forward. Moving forward. Don't just stand still. Move to the side, move up, move down, move left, move right, but move. Do something to get yourself to feel confident that you are able to handle what has happened, that the negative things aren't going to knock you down. And you never know what you're capable of doing. You may think that you have all the skills necessary, but when something bad happens, you're not able to demonstrate it. Or the opposite, you may believe yourself to be meek and not have any skills, but when put to the test, when the chips are down, that's when you shine. And you never know. And so it's best just to do what you already know how to do. And if you have information, reveal it. If you know that you can have influence over someone to help for something positive, do it. If you can see that a piece of trash needs to just be picked up from the ground in order to beautify the street or beautify the park, then just do that. Do what you are confident in, and it will build your resiliency.
One of the things that's happened to Paula a lot during this process is that I think it's interesting what you just said. When you're speaking to someone and you feel confused, you're often being lied to. I mean, that's been something that's happened a multitude of times with this case. But for Paula, she's had a lot of resistance from law enforcement who continue to tell her that she is the problem and why the case is not being solved, which we find absolutely ridiculous because no one was investigating this case for several years. It was obviously a cold case. It seems like that's just blatant gaslighting that she's encountering and what she's being forced to deal with on a daily basis every time she goes to law enforcement and tries to explain to them, here's a tip, here's this. They then follow up on it. But when she doesn't bring them any tips and she doesn't bring them any new information, they don't really do anything. And then they go out and then they tell other people that the reason the case hasn't been solved is because of her. So how can she handle that? Yeah,
because what they're saying specifically is initially, before she did the podcast, long before, after 2013, she started a Facebook group to try to find answers and try to create a portal, a safe place for people to give information in the community that she can run with, that she can give to law enforcement. Because anything she got, she gave to law enforcement. She was completely participating with them and giving them and cooperating with them.
And transparent about everything.
About everything. She handed everything. Someone gave her a piece of evidence, she immediately and sometimes she was giving it to the corrupt sheriff's department before he was ousted, even knowing in the back of her mind that it was probably not a good idea, but she went through the proper channels. And it's only been since this last year and a half where not that she didn't continue to do that, but she just kept her mouth shut and didn't say anything until we started doing the podcast. How can you speak to that?
The idea that citizens impair a law enforcement agency's ability to investigate crimes is preposterous, right? Why would Crime Stoppers exist if it was the case that citizens impede? Now, there's certainly ways in which a citizen could impede, but then they would be charged with obstruction of justice. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is it is important that everybody understand, including law enforcement, that you serve and protect the community, which requires you to have good relationships within the community, because how else are you going to be getting the intelligence that you need in order to solve the crime, right? This world doesn't exist the way shows like CSI and Criminal Minds, right? That's fiction. That's not how the real world works. The real world works with police officers and detectives, right? Law enforcement agencies knocking on doors, asking questions to every single person within a canvassing area, getting all the information that they can. Real detective work requires that you have a positive relationship with members of the community so that they feel confident enough to tell you the truth about whatever it was that's happened.
And they feel safe to tell you the truth.
And they feel safe to tell you that, exactly. And so to say that law enforcement officials in some way believe that they are being impeded or impaired because of one person is indicative of the idea that they don't want a camera or a light shining on whatever it is that they're doing. So they're going to put it on someone else. Now, I'm not saying that the individual officers that she's talked to are all corrupt or all don't want an answer. What I'm saying is that there can be a culture that is developed in which there is an other, right? There's us and then there's others. And law enforcement in particular can at times have a culture, we've seen it in other communities, where they can have a culture where they're not serving and protecting, but they're ruling over, right? That they take the idea of law enforcement a little too seriously, and they forget the connections that they have, that community policing does work, right? So I think it just goes to this idea that there's still very much a separation of the different aspects of a community, those that live in it, those that are being asked to protect it. And because of that, they will feel that they are being impaired and impeded if someone from the other tries to invade into what is their territory. So they may even take the information, but they're not going to give her credit for it. They may say, oh, well, thank you for all of this stuff, but they're not going to believe that. These are just going to be things that they just tell her in order to turn her away, to get her out the door. What they do with it after is really what's important. And it doesn't seem like they're doing really anything with it, which suggests that they continue to feel separated, right? That they believe themselves somehow separated from the community that they're in charge of protecting.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, I just want to talk about one other thing here, and this is kind of going fast forward here. Let's say in the next month or two, the crime is solved, the people who were involved are arrested and being prepared for hearings and trials on this case. What recommendations do you have for the victims' families on how to process this, and what are they going to need to really do in order to kind of not have closure, because we know there's no closure, just some sort of resolution for them, both emotionally and psychologically? What are they going to need to do in order to kind of move on with their lives?
Whatever it is that they experience, they have to remind themselves and tell themselves over and over and over again that it is normal. Whatever the experience is, some people may look at, well, this person didn't cry, so they must not have cared. That's probably not true. So if you feel like crying, cry. If you don't feel like crying, then don't cry. If you want to be angry, be angry. If you want to be filled with hate, be filled with hate. If you want to embrace and forgive and forget, and if you want to do all those things, anything that you feel, anything that you want to do is normal. The difference is that you can't stay there. right? You can't stay there. If you're feeling like you're full of hate, full of rage, you can't stay there. If you're feeling very sad, you can't stay there, right? There are places that we go that are very negative. It makes sense given the context of whatever it is that's happening, but you can't stay there. You have to remember that these people, whoever they are, whoever it was that was involved in these kinds of things, will one day be met with justice. Now, it may not be your definition of justice, but it will happen. Something will happen. Are you willing to accept that? If not, well, perhaps you need to talk to someone so that you can help reframe what you think of as justice. Or perhaps it is. Perhaps it is the exact what you wanted to happen as punishment for the people that were involved. Maybe it is the exact same thing that's happened. Does that make you feel good then? Because if it doesn't, then perhaps you need to rethink about, you need to reframe what you think about justice. Once again, all of these things, all of what you would be experiencing, anything that you would be experiencing would be considered normal. Do not be afraid of crying. Do not be afraid of not crying. Do not be afraid of feeling angry, of feeling hurt. Don't be afraid of those kinds of things. Allow it to happen. Don't try to cover it up with something. Don't excessively drink, or don't go to some kind of external influence. Don't go to any of these kinds of things. Let it happen. Let it happen. Feel it happening. Feel the reality of the situation. And what you're going to notice is that it hurts for a little bit, but then you recognize that you're going to make it, that you're going to survive, that you're going to be resilient, that you're going to make it through to the next day. And really, that's what we want. We want people to make it through to the next day. Over time, then you're going to start noticing that you're much more stronger than you had ever recognized yourself as being. And that's okay, right? And sometimes it's going to come back where you're going to start having nightmares. That's okay too. It could be a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road. That's okay. All of it is okay. But if you're feeling overwhelmed and if you're feeling like you cannot move at all, that's when you seek out professional help. And don't be afraid to seek out professional help, because there are those of us who can help you move in the direction that you want to move.
I think that's a perfect place to end it right there.
I do too. Thank you so much. This has been really helpful, and it's going to help a lot of people who have been affected by this, and we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, because we were always wondering how this community is going to move on from this after this is resolved, and because it's concerning, because we have kind of a pulse of the community now. We knew nothing about this community, and we've really kind of embraced them and their sadness and their outrage and their confusion over this case. And a lot of them, have family members too, the kids now that are the same age as Molly and Colt, and they're worried that, these people are still floating around. So we appreciate you breaking it down from both an emotional and psychological standpoint, because I think a lot of people don't understand what they're feeling right now about this case.
Sure.
And it's very confusing. We're confused emotionally. Mm-hmm. It's like an up and down roller coaster. We deal with it every day, and we're not sure how to process that. But you said the word, every day you get a little stronger. You just keep on pumping those positive thoughts and allowing the negative ones to wash over you, but don't stay there. And I think that's I think that's the biggest piece of advice for this whole community when this is all said and done is, be outraged, be mad, be sad, be horrified, rejoice because it's resolved, but move on and don't stay there.
Don't numb yourself from it.
Right. Yeah. Don't do that either. Yeah, for sure. Feel it. You got to feel it. In order to know that you can survive and move forward and be healthy, you got to know. You got to feel the whole thing.
Well, this is great. Thanks, John.
Thank you so much, John.
Appreciate it.
Yes, thanks so much.
And we'd love to check back with you if we could, because obviously this thing is developing, and and hopefully when there is a resolution, we'd love to check back in with you, and maybe you can offer some more words of wisdom for this community.
For sure. Absolutely, Jay. Just let me know.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks. You too. Bye.
Bye.
Next time on Partners in True Crime.
Our investigation into the case of Molly Miller and Colt Haynes continues. We're going to be sorting through tips, and we are going to be speaking to new experts in law enforcement and the legal field from around the country who will hopefully help us unravel this mystery.
If you or anyone you know is suffering from a methamphetamine addiction, please contact the American Meth Addiction Hotline.
If you or anyone you know has been the victim of sexual abuse, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
For any tips relating to the disappearance of Molly Miller and Colt Haynes, please contact 833-4-MOLLY and Colt, and they will be directed to the proper law enforcement agency.
All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content. Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and listen to Vi's original song, Take Me Back, written for Molly Miller.